Stop. Just stop for a moment. Don't scroll. Because if these words reached you today, something may have already changed before you even realized it. No, this is not about luck. This is not another motivational speech. And this is definitely not a coincidence. You didn't search for this message. In a strange way, this message found you. Take one slow breath. Now ask yourself one question. Why do you suddenly feel like your old life no longer fits? Why do familiar places feel different? Why do certain people seem distant, even though nothing was said? And why does it feel like something inside you has been quietly waking up, while the rest of the world carries on as if nothing has happened? Most people ignore these moments. They call them stress. They call them coincidence. They tell themselves they'll figure it out later. But you stopped. And that simple choice changes everything. Because there comes a point in every bloodline when one person begins to hear what everyone else has forgotten. Maybe that person is you. No one prepared you for this. No one teaches children that families carry more than names. They carry memories, patterns, promises, strength that survives generations, and sometimes unfinished battles waiting for someone brave enough to end them. What if your strange feelings aren't confusion at all? What if they are signals? Quiet, almost impossible to hear, yet impossible to ignore once they begin. Think of an old radio hidden inside a forgotten house. For years it sits in silence. Dust covers it. Everyone assumes it no longer works. Then one day, without warning, a frequency appears. The radio didn't become new. It simply remembered the signal it was always built to receive. Now listen carefully. What if your soul works the same way? What if something ancient inside you has just recognized a frequency that has been calling your family for generations? Not everyone hears that call. But those who do never see life the same way again. This is where many people become afraid. Because the first sign of real activation doesn't feel like power. It feels like uncertainty. Old habits begin falling away. Dreams become unusually vivid. Random memories appear without explanation. People who once understood you suddenly don't. It feels uncomfortable, almost lonely. But here's what no one tells you. The seed always breaks before the tree begins to grow. The greatest power never arrives with noise. It arrives when the old version of you can no longer survive. Read that again, because one day you'll realize it explained everything. You may have spent years believing you were falling behind, watching others move ahead, questioning your own path, wondering why every door seemed to close just as you reached it. But what if those closed doors weren't punishment? What if they were protection? Imagine walking through a dense forest at night. Every path looks inviting. Every direction feels possible. Then one by one, invisible gates begin closing. At first you panic. You think you're trapped. Until sunrise reveals something incredible. Every closed path was leading toward danger. Only one remained open. The one you were meant to walk. Life often works that way. Your ancestors may not have spoken to you with words, but sometimes their wisdom moves through timing instead of language. A delay. A sudden ending. An unexpected meeting. A feeling you couldn't explain. Each one quietly guiding you towards something larger than your current understanding. Now you might be wondering, if this activation is real, why now? Why after all these years? That question opens a door very few people ever dare to enter. Because what is happening around the world today, and what is happening inside you, may not be separate events at all. And once you see the connection, you'll never look at your own life the same way again. Before we go deeper, take one moment. If something inside you already feels strangely familiar, let that be your answer. Leave a comment saying, I am ready. Like this video, so this message reaches the next person whose time has finally come. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because what you're about to discover next isn't just about your family. It's about the hidden inheritance that has been waiting specifically for you. The moment you accept that possibility, another question appears. If this hidden inheritance has always been there, who protected it until now? Stay with me. Because this is where the story changes. Long before you were born, before your parents, before even the oldest stories your family still remembers, every generation faced a single choice. Some protected what mattered. Some forgot. Some walked away because life became too heavy. And every time someone gave up, the weight quietly moved to the next generation. No one called it a curse. It wasn't. It was unfinished work. Imagine a relay race. One runner becomes too tired to continue. They don't throw away the baton. They pass it forward, whether the next runner feels ready or not. That is how unseen patterns travel through families. Not through magic, but through choices, fear, silence, and the dreams people abandoned because they believed they were impossible. Now ask yourself something honest. Have you ever felt responsible for something you couldn't explain? Have you ever carried emotions that seemed older than your own experiences? Have you ever looked at your life and quietly wondered, why does it feel like I'm supposed to do something important, but I don't know what it is? Most people silence those questions. You didn't. That's why you're still here. Now let me tell you a story. Not because it's ancient, but because every person who hears it finds a piece of themselves inside it. There was once a young woman named Lyra. She lived in a quiet valley surrounded by mountains that never seemed to change. Every morning, she followed the same path to gather water. Every evening, she returned home before sunset. Nothing unusual ever happened. Until one morning, she noticed footprints. Not in the dirt, but glowing softly across the grass. No one else could see them. When she asked her family, they smiled politely and blamed her imagination. When she asked the village elders, their faces became strangely serious. One elder whispered only 7 words. Your blood finally remembers what it once knew. Then he walked away. No explanation. No answers. Only more questions. For weeks, the glowing footprints appeared before sunrise, always leading toward the same forgotten mountain. Lyra resisted. She had responsibilities, people depending on her. She convinced herself the visions would disappear. Instead, they grew brighter. Then something even stranger happened. Every time she ignored the path, life became heavier. Simple decisions felt impossible. Her energy disappeared. Nothing flowed. But whenever she took even one step toward those glowing footprints, a deep sense of peace returned, as if something unseen was quietly saying, you're finally moving in the right direction. Now listen carefully. This story isn't really about Lyra. It's about what happens when your inner direction becomes louder than outside opinions. How many times have you ignored your deepest feeling because someone else called it unrealistic? How many opportunities did you leave behind because fear sounded more logical than hope? Here's what no one tells you. Your ancestral power doesn't shout. It whispers. And only those willing to slow down can hear it. Your destiny rarely knocks on the front door. It waits in the silence everyone else ignores. Think about that. Maybe the discomfort you've been feeling isn't a sign that you're lost. Maybe it's a sign that you've outgrown the life built from other people's expectations. That's why certain friendships fade. That's why old routines suddenly feel empty. That's why your heart keeps searching for something it can't yet name. This isn't failure. This is movement. Not movement your eyes can measure, but movement your spirit already recognizes. And here's where the mystery becomes even deeper, because Lyra eventually discovered that the glowing footprints were not leading her to a treasure. They were leading her to a forgotten place that had been waiting for someone carrying her exact bloodline. What she found there changed not only her future, but the story of every generation that came after her. The surprising part? Something very similar may already be unfolding in your own life, even if you haven't recognized the signs yet. Before we uncover what Lyra discovered beyond that mountain, take a deep breath. Comment below, I hear the call, if something in this story feels strangely familiar. And stay with me. Because what waited beyond that mountain wasn't an object. It was a truth that completely transformed her understanding of who she really was. Take another slow breath. Because this is the moment everything begins to connect. Lyra stood at the foot of the mountain just before sunrise. The glowing footprint stopped. For the first time, there was only silence. No light. No sign. Nothing. She almost turned back. Every logical thought told her she had imagined the entire journey. But then, A warm wind moved through the trees without touching a single leaf. The air felt different, almost as if the mountain itself had noticed she had arrived. Hidden behind thick vines was a narrow stone doorway no one in the valley had ever mentioned. It wasn't locked. It wasn't guarded. It simply waited, as though it had been expecting one person and one person only. Her hand trembled as she brushed away the vines. Ancient symbols covered the stone. She couldn't read them. Yet somehow, they felt familiar. Not to her mind, but to something much deeper. The moment her fingertips touched the doorway, a low vibration echoed through the ground. Not loud enough to frighten her, just enough to make her heartbeat change. Then the stone slowly opened. No gears. No chains. Only silence. Inside was a circular chamber lit by soft golden light. There were no treasures. No crowns. No piles of gold. Only shelves carved into the walls, holding hundreds of empty glass vessels. At least, they looked empty. As Lyra stepped closer, each vessel began glowing one after another. Not all at once. One, then another. Then another. As though they were recognizing her presence. She reached toward the nearest one. The instant she touched it, images flooded her mind. A woman refusing to surrender during a terrible storm. A young father protecting strangers instead of running away. An old healer placing her hands on a frightened child. None of these people knew Lyra. Yet somehow, she knew them. Not by name. By feeling. She felt their courage. Their heartbreak. Their impossible choices. Their hope. Tears rolled down her face before she even understood why. It wasn't sadness. It was recognition. Now listen carefully. What if your greatest inheritance isn't money, or land, or a family name? What if the greatest inheritance is unseen strength, built one brave decision at a time, across generations? Think about your own life. Have there been moments when you handled something so difficult that even you couldn't explain where your strength came from? Maybe it wasn't created in that moment. Maybe it was awakened. Here's what no one tells you. Real ancestral power doesn't replace who you are. It reminds you of what has always been inside you. The strongest inheritance is not carried in your hands. It is carried in the choices your soul remembers before your mind understands. As Lyra stood in that chamber, one vessel remained dark, unlike the others. It refused to glow. She walked toward it. The closer she came, the colder the room became. A quiet voice echoed through the chamber, not from outside, but from within her own heart. One memory still sleeps. She froze. What did that mean? Why was only one vessel silent? And why did she suddenly feel as though that single vessel mattered more than all the others combined? The room itself seemed to hold its breath. Even the golden light faded. Then, the silent vessel cracked. Not enough to break. Just enough for a thin line of brilliant light to escape. The light didn't spread across the room. It moved directly toward Lyra, straight to the center of her chest. She gasped. Not because it hurt, but because she suddenly remembered something she had never lived. A promise. Made generations ago. A promise someone had failed to keep. And somehow, that unfinished promise had reached her. Now ask yourself, have you ever felt drawn toward something you couldn't explain? A place. A dream. A purpose. As if your life was gently pulling you toward a destination you couldn't yet see? What if that feeling isn't random? What if it's the quiet echo of something waiting to be completed? If this message is speaking to you, type, "I remember" in the comments. Like this video if you've ever felt there was more to your story than what others could see. Because we're about to uncover the one promise hidden inside Lyra's bloodline. The promise that had remained untouched for generations. And once it was revealed, nothing in her reality stayed the same. Now stay with me. Because this is the moment where the story stops being only about Lyra and quietly becomes about you. The light resting in the center of her chest didn't disappear. It began to pulse. Slowly. Like a second heartbeat. With every pulse, The chamber around her changed. The stone walls faded. The shelves disappeared. Suddenly, she found herself standing beneath a sky filled with thousands of stars, brighter than any night she had ever seen. There was no mountain, no doorway, only an endless field of light stretching beyond the horizon. Then she noticed them. Figures. Silent. Standing in a long circle around her. She couldn't see their faces clearly. Some looked young. Some old. Some carried walking sticks. Others wore simple clothes covered with dust from long journeys. None of them spoke. Yet every one of them was looking at her. Not with judgment. Not with expectation. But with hope. A feeling so deep it almost brought her to her knees. One figure slowly stepped forward. He held nothing in his hands. No weapon. No crown. Only a small lantern whose flame never moved despite the wind. He raised the lantern toward Lyra. And for the first time, someone finally spoke. You are not here because you are the strongest. A long silence followed. You are here because you refuse to stop listening. Those words echoed through the entire field. And something inside Lyra finally made sense. She had spent years believing strength meant never feeling fear. Never doubting. Never falling. But every person standing before her carried scars. Every one of them had failed. Every one of them had lost something precious. Yet none of them had allowed pain to become their final identity. Now listen carefully. How many times have you judged yourself because life became difficult? How many times have you believed your setbacks proved you weren't ready? What if they proved the exact opposite? What if every challenge you've survived has been quietly preparing you for a responsibility you couldn't have carried before? Think of iron placed into fire. It doesn't become stronger because the fire is gentle. It becomes stronger because it survives the heat. Maybe your difficult seasons were never meant to destroy you. Maybe they were shaping a version of you capable of carrying something greater. Your deepest wounds are often the doors your greatest strength has been waiting to walk through. The lantern suddenly grew brighter. Its light spread across the field. One by one, the silent figures began fading into the light. Not disappearing. Returning. As the last figure dissolved into the glow, Lyra noticed something on the ground. A single thread of golden light. It stretched far into the distance. Almost like a path. Without thinking, she followed it. The farther she walked. Confident. Peaceful. Unafraid of standing alone. A tear rolled down her cheek. Not because she was sad. It was showing the truth that had always been waiting beneath her fears. The stranger spoke one final time. The activation was never outside you. It began the moment you chose to remember who you are. In that instant, the mirror dissolved into countless particles of golden light. They didn't fly into the sky. They flowed through Lyra, as though every forgotten piece of her spirit had finally come home. At sunrise, she walked back down the mountain. The valley looked exactly the same. The houses hadn't changed. The roads were still familiar. The people were living their ordinary lives. But Lyra was different. She no longer searched for signs. She had become one. And that is the quiet truth hidden inside this story. Real activation doesn't always announce itself with dramatic events. Sometimes it begins with a single decision. To trust yourself. To heal what was never yours to carry. To choose courage one more time. And to remember that every step you take today can become a gift for the generations that follow. If this story found you at the right moment, comment, I choose to remember. Like this video if you believe your greatest strength has been inside you all along. Subscribe if you're ready to continue this journey together. Because sometimes, the most powerful awakening isn't discovering a new life. It's finally recognizing the extraordinary person you've been becoming all along.